Stavo facendo un ripasso. È per terra però.
I think we had a small glitch on our system. Broadcast wasn't started, so my sound wasn't reached to you. But now I think you're able to hear me. So sorry for this delay. Let me start from scratch real quick. We spent almost 15-20 minutes for the presentation, but I'm sure we will be able to cover up this part real quick. Let me see my webcam again. Okay, let's start with the intro part. I was describing the intro part. So there are ISPE GAMP5 Second Edition parts as a rationale, structure, what is new in this document, as well as purpose and the scope of our document too. So the introduction phase was described within this entry phase of the document. And one thing is quite critical here, which we emphasized before. This is not a prescriptive method or a standard like any ISO standards, but rather than provides pragmatic guidance, approaches, and tools for the practitioners. When applied with expertise and good judgment, this guide offers you a robust, cost-effective approach aligned with all current standards and industry practices. So you don't have to worry about the GAMP5 requirements because it's a guideline that gives you the background, also the applications where you can implement in pharmaceutical environment. So this document also provides the rational parts. It's providing you the second edition guide aims to protect patient safety, product quality, as well as data integrity by facilitating and encouraging the achievements of computerized systems that are effective, reliable, and the high quality. So when we look at the overall approach of our system, the framework and key concept remained unchanged. Technical content of the guideline has been updated, and these technical part includes the IT service providers, including cloud services, software development, including incremental and iterative models and methods, and increased use of software tools and automation to achieve greater control, higher quality, and lower risk throughout the life cycle of your product. So when we talked about the high technologies that are also implemented into the system, they are very familiar, they are very famous these days, and this artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud computing, as well as open source software and the cloud software technologies are also mentioned within this guideline. So the underlying subjects, which are quite critical to understand the second editions, are importance of critical thinking, patient-centric approach, which used to be available in pharmacy environment in hospitals. Now we take this and adopt it to the pharmaceutical world so that we will be able to take the patient into the center of all our organization rather than just the risk-based approach. Concepts of computerized systems assurance also included into this document. Supporting ISP initiatives and harmonized documents are knowledge management, APQ, which is advancing pharmaceutical quality, and Pharma 4.0. These are the basics of most of the guidelines and baselines published by the ISPE. So since the new GAMP5 is published, they also included and harmonized with the other documents that are published by the ISPE. When we talk about knowledge management, this is focusing on how organizations create, manage, and use knowledge throughout the life cycle of a product. And advancing pharmaceutical quality is building industry for industry tools and programs to help companies assess and improve their quality operations. Pharma 4.0 is providing guidance aligned with the regulatory requirements specific to the pharmaceutical industry to accelerate Pharma 4.0 transformations. Even if it's a little bit late for GAMP5, still good to have these Pharma 4.0 concept, which is digital maturity all the way to the data integrity by design. So the entire word described as a life cycle approach again, but under Pharma 4.0 structure. This is a best practice based on ISPE guidelines that are enhanced by the digital transformational approach to the real-time data-driven processes. So what's new in the new guideline? Before we start, we should understand the structure of the document, the first edition as well as the second edition. GAMP5 comes with the principles and the framework, which is less than 80 pages, so that the system overall description given to the users, the practitioners, as well as this main body describes all the aspects of the document. Appendices are the supporting documents. This is the, rather than the main body, you can find all the information related to these parts in the appendices. And to support these appendices, good practice guidelines has to be handy for your application. For example, if you are describing any GAMP5 framework in your HVAC systems, then the guideline, good practice guideline also published by the ISPE for HVAC system design could be a good document that will help you to achieve your goals. And supporting information and materials could be from the industry as well as from the ISPE network, from their website or the libraries, or any documents that also published by your company could be the supporting information for this part. When we take a look at GAMP5 Second Edition, we will be seeing 8 chapters as a main body. Introduction, key concept, life cycle approach and the phases, risk management, the quality risk management, regulated company activities, supplier activities, as well as efficiency improvements. GAMP5 first edition was 351 pages, 78 pages in the body, rest were the annexures of the document, and the second edition was 400 pages, other than excellent sample forms and system retirement plan template. So this is also giving you the detailed information about GAMP5 and how you will be implementing it into your own system. The second edition comes with a retirement plan document where you can also implement directly from the template, and you can use it in your pharmaceutical environment. Appendices are 5 chapters. Appendix M was management, D was for development, O for operation, S for special interest topics, and the final one is the general, where you can find all information related to GAMP5 in Appendix G. So what is new? What is added into the new chapter, this new second edition? This Appendix D8 all the way to 11 is describing the design phase, agile software tool, distributed ledger systems, which is a blockchain, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and IT infrastructure in Appendix M11, and 12, critical thinking. I think the most powerful tool in the second edition is the critical thinking part, because this part also supports our risk-based approach as well as the core of our documentation in order to ensure that we are patient-centric as well as the quality is still sitting on our perspective. Otherwise, if you are just thinking about the risk-based approach, sometimes you are skipping the most important part but focusing on the document that you are creating. Next one is the significantly updated guidance, which are Appendix D1, specifying requirement, and S2, electronic production records. Removed parts are functional specification, repair activities, managing quality within an outsourced IS and IT environment. This doesn't mean that GAMP5 is not covering these parts anymore. They are either moved into the main body or within the other chapters they are covered by the other appendixes. The overall GAMP5 framework, key concept, system life cycles, specification and verification approach, and quality risk management remained unchanged in this second edition. So the purpose of this document is to provide a cost-effective framework of good practice to ensure that computerized systems are effective and of high quality, fit for intended use, and compliant with the applicable regulations. This guide is intended for use for regulated companies, suppliers, and regulators as well. One critical point here, this document is not written only for the users in pharmaceutical environment, for the end users. This is also for the suppliers who are manufacturing software or hardware for the pharmaceutical environment. So whomever giving the service for pharmaceutical environment has to know the GAMP5. I'm saying has to know because we know that most of the systems that are designed by the companies are directly adopted by the end users. So end user, sometimes they're overlooking items due to overwhelm processes, but for companies who are providing these services to the pharmaceutical environment has to know the details of GAMP5 in order to provide the right solution to the right people. Purpose? Again, it's a multidisciplinary activities. This is not for IT, not for quality department. This also includes the manufacturing department, management, research, support staff, engineering, labs, development cycles, as well as the quality and IT departments. So I'm putting IT and quality at the end because most of the people think that implementing GAMP5 or any other guidelines or even standards are the responsibility of quality departments or the IT department of if it is related to the computerized systems. In fact, it's not. It's an overall multidisciplinary activity that has to be followed with all departments and the different stakeholders. So when it comes to the purpose of this document, we have to be careful. These GAMP documents are not guides. They are guides. They are not standards. It's good to have and implement them into your daily routine, but they're not the standards. You don't have to follow them. In fact, if you want to know how to follow standards, it's good to have these guidelines because guidelines are in general explaining the details of or the expectation of your standards. For example, ISO 14644 standard is valid for any clean rooms in electronics, aerospace, semiconductor, medical production, as well as pharmaceutical world. So you cannot find all details related to your industry in the standard, but you can implement these documents so that you can find the right way to be compliant with the standards. But for GAMP documents, they are all guides and not standards. It is your responsibility to implement them into your procedures or documentation to meet the acceptable regulatory requirements. And there is no GAMP certification, no approval for GAMP or GAMP5, or being a compliant for GAMP5 is not a certification process. It is just a self-declaration. Once you implement them, you can say that, okay, my operation is GAMP5 compliant, so that this means you're following up with the GAMP5 requirements. The scope of this document also covers good manufacturing practices, as well as many other GXPs, including the good clinical practice, laboratory practice, distribution practice, and pharmacovigilance practices. Also, medical device regulations are under this GAMP5 scope, and this scope also addressed by international requirements, including the ISO standards and EN norms. When we take a look at the key concept, we will be seeing 5 sections. In order to understand these 5 sections, let's take a look at the concept given in figure in this GAMP5 environment. To understand the product and process, that's the critical part, because if you don't understand how you are approaching to your product and your process from development all the way to the produced and the marketing it, you cannot really know where you will be putting your product and process in your life cycle approach. And your quality management system will not really address your needs as a user. So the first step will be product and process understanding. Then the second one will be the life cycle approach within the QMS, which is adopting a complete computerized system life cycle. It defines activities in a systematic way from the system conception all the way to the retirement. This enables management control and a consistent approach across your system. And scalable lifecycle activities also follows next, and science-based quality risk management comes as the fourth figure of this key concept. And leverage supplier involvement is critical because whatever you learn from the supplier, since you're not designing the entire solution, is critical because all the operators, all the end users and practitioners will be following up this guideline. That's why the regulated companies should seek to maximize supplier involvement throughout the system lifecycle in order to leverage knowledge, experience, and documentation subject to satisfactory supplier assessment. And the lifecycle approach. This lifecycle approach entails defining and performing activities in a systematic way from conception all the way to the system retirement, following with the understanding of the requirement through development, release, operational use cycles, including all the updates during operations and the system retirements. The root of this system comes from the ISTM E2500 standard guide for specification, design and verification of pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical manufacturing system and equipment, as shown in this diagram. All the way from the requirements to the retirement for the system, good engineering practice follows the risk management, design review, as well as change management. None of these systems can be used without any updates down the road because the system changes, all the requests from the user changes, also the expectation from the field, from the market, as well as the product changes, so that you have to be verifying your system. That's why this lifecycle approach goes into the second stage thanks to GAMP5, and the phases as concept, project, operation, and the retirement of an entire system goes one by one. And this is a life cycle approach, which means whatever we potentially migrate from the previous system starts with the requirement additions. We make our concept design, then we assess all the GXP expectations, then the project management comes in place, makes all the project completed according to the requirements, and then release it. Operations are using it in a certain period of time, which is undefined at the beginning, but there are many changes down the road due to the nature of the product, expectations whatsoever. So all the change will be updated into the system. Then when the time comes, the potential retention, migration or destruction of the system by ending it with a retirement program. So this is a life cycle approach where the retirement also ignites the new potential migration and the new system requirements, so that system goes back to the square number one and everything starts from scratch. As you all know, this linear approach was the heart of GAMP5, the first edition. We were all saying that the planning has to be start first, then the specification. Whatever we specify has to be approved so that the configuration and coding will be following up with this. And we have to verify our system with installation qualification, operational qualification, whatever qualification we will be implementing has to be addressed all the questions from the specification part. And reporting in general, also addressing our planning, GXP environment, as well as requirements from the field. So this V scheme was quite famous with the GAMP5. Now the value added part of the new GAMP5 Second Edition come up with iterative and incremental approach, which is again the life cycle, because if you don't know from scratch of all your needs for your system, you cannot really design from day first and implement it all the way to the coming days. In fact, you can plan it, you can specify, configure and code, verify and report, so that your reports can ignite another planning and specification and coding, so on and so forth. Idea behind is, if you know all the aspects of your system, V-Scheme is the best approach, still this linear approach that I showed you as the best practice. However, sometimes iterative or incremental approach is the best practice because you don't know what's expecting you down the road, especially if you just started as a pharmaceutical operations or if you have a new additions to your system. So this iterative and incremental approach could be the best practice to implement on your system. So the next one is the critical thinking. I think the most valuable part of the GAMP5 Second Edition is this critical thinking, because before having this part, we were all overwhelmed with the risk-based approach. Sometimes this risk-based approach goes over and beyond our expectations in terms of addressing our problems, but giving another burden so that we get back to ourselves and said, okay, why we are doing this, why we're making this risk assessment for the product, for the patient. So asking the right questions is the most important part of GAMP5 now. So we're asking the first question to ourselves. Are you asking the right questions? This critical thinking is an unbased evaluation of an argument or a statement in order to fully understand the argument and its intent, conclusion, and the quality of the evidence used to support it. So this life cycle approach comes with the critical thinking, also giving us the guide of this critical thinking is the self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, which attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. So if you take a look at the past of critical thinking, it started in 1987 as a concept, so that mindfulness will not be enough to make the right thing, so that they are adding another level of it as a critical thinking, and it will allow you to ask yourself the right questions in order to take the right action. And the final decision, final description on the critical thinking would be a well-cultivated critical thinker raised vital questions and problems, formulating them clearly and precisely, gathers and assesses relevant information, using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively, comes to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions, testing them against relevant criteria and standards, thinks open-mindedly within alternative systems of thought, recognizing and assessing, as need to be, the assumptions, implications, and practical consequences, and communicates effectively with others in figuring out solutions to a complex problems. Our life cycle approach comes with this critical thinking to add solution with the drawings here. So we are expecting it to fit for intended use, has to be a risk-based approach, has to be multi-layered assurance, but the optimal benefit is in the cross-section of this part. So the critical thinking promotes informed decision-making and good judgment on where and how to apply and scale quality and compliance activities for computerized systems. It relies on knowledge of the business process and the detailed comprehension and analysis of where the business process can potentially impact patient safety, product quality, and the data integrity. A better understanding of risks results in more confidence in the assessment of control of those risks, and therefore supporting robust scaling of controls and validation activities. So if you take a look at the life cycle phases, there are concept, project, operate, and retire. This is the most simple definition of the phases. Let's start with the concept. Concept is the detailed activities in this phase will be depend on the company approaches to initiating and justifying the project's requirements. The second one will be the project itself. This project, the key supporting processes of risk management, change and configuration management, design review, traceability, and document management are described in this section. If you take a look at this, we down this to the linear approach by the planning, specification, configuration and coding, verification, and the release and reporting, all the way to the operations. So again, when we take a look at this V scheme, if this is GAMP category 3, which is out of the shelf solutions, we have a simple requirement as a specification and simple verification steps. For example, you have a data logger with a specific software, not configurable. You will be buying from the market. It receives to your company, then you apply the IQ and OQ protocols in order to make your specifications verified by the documentation, and this is out of the shelf solution. In such cases, and based on satisfactory supplier and risk assessment, a simple approach consisting of one level of specification and verification is typically applicable because it's not a detailed system. It is quite easy to implement and nothing to be customized for you. Second one will be the configured products, which is category 4. GAMP5 category 4 includes the requirement specification as well as the configuration and the functional specification. Then the configured product will be tested based on your configuration and functional specification. Also, requirements will be tested based on your user requirement specification. Commercial software products that are configured for a specific business process are typically classified under this category. In such cases, and based on satisfactory supplier and risk assessment, a flexible approach to specification and verification may be applied. The number of specification and verification of functionality delivered by the system configuration will depend on the size, complexity, and technical architecture of the system. Final one will be the category 4, will be configured product is the testing stage. So first we need to test the correct installation, then the configuration, then the functionality that supports the specific business process based on the risk and supplier assessment. And we have to test and demonstrate the fitness for intended use and the further tests which are based on your risk assessment as well as user requirement specification, so that you will be answering the question, the system that I invested are also addressing all the needs that I described on my user requirement specification. That's the most critical question here. And this is how we are saying in the critical thinking environment as well. So supplier activities for the category 4 products, they're going to supply the product specification and test protocols as required on behalf of the regulated company, but not user requirement specification, because user requirement specification has to be prepared by you as a pharmaceutical regulated environment. But they can also answer all your questions on your user requirement specification by functional specification, design specifications, and implementing them, as well as on the right side of our V scheme, testing and qualifying them. And they can give you the support during configuration and testing. They can do the documentation for the users, including the manuals and user documents, or even the backup policies. They can give you the training and the support and maintenance your activities, including the repair, calibration, and whatsoever you expect from the supplier. The final category is the category 5, which is completely a custom application. Some computerized systems are developed to meet individual user requirements, where no commercially available solution is suitable. Tailor-made computerized systems are the key here, where you describe your requirement in user requirement specification. In fact, none of the out-of-shelf systems or customable software platform can answer your questions or meet your requirements. That's why you have to go with the GAMP5 category 5 custom applications. Your specification, requirement specification, will be addressed by the functional specification, then the design specification, and the supplier will be describing the module specification in order to meet all these requirements. Then the code modules, put them together, install the system, and testing the modules, which is in general known as an installation qualification. And the integration testing also addresses the functional specifications that you're given, and the functional testing also addresses the requirements from day first as the system which is suitable for its intended use. This operational qualification can be described under this part. But requirement testing, which is overall performance qualification of the system, addresses your user requirement specification. And in general, the system design companies can do the IQ and OQ, but the overall PQ has to be done by the third-party supplier because it has to be verified, whatever done by the supplier as an activity in category 5 environment. So the responsibilities are quite similar with the category 4. Only additional one is to demonstrate the fitness for intended use and allow acceptance for the system against custom specifications, as well as preparing the test documents for these custom requirements. Finally, supplier activities typically include the product and specification of test specification on behalf of the company, regulated company, development of the new software, testing it, documenting it, training the user, as well as supporting them in terms of service and maintenance and calibration. So, operation. In general, when we hand over the system from the project team to the users, we are not really giving attention to the system as a living organism. But in general, when we hand over the system according to GAMP5 again, there are a lot of requirements as a system operation. System itself requires a maintenance. System itself requires change down the road because it's a complex structure and maybe some of the system design may not be fit into intended use due to changes in regulations, and that's why security and system administration, change management processes, incident management and CAPA processes, business continuity management processes, audit and review processes, along with the outputs from these audit has to be considered in order to maintain, if needed, to revise the system operations. Until you retire your system, you have to follow up this cycle again and again. So Appendix O, operations, is the good key here in order to understand how to maintain these operations. It starts with the handover from project department to the operations, establish and managing software services described in another appendix, together with system monitoring, incident management, operational changes, periodic review, backup and storage, security management, as well as archiving and retrieval of the system will be included in these appendices. Important part here, you have to get the support of the supplier in order to make a seamless operation. Otherwise, if you take their support on the project phase only, then the operational department having issues with the system has then less knowledge than the project department. Nowadays, most of the pharmaceutical departments, there's a gap between the project department as well as operation. That's why all the knowledge remains with the project group and the operation struggling in order to maintain the activities and the daily use of the system. And retire. There are 4 types of potential retirement plan. First one is withdrawal. Withdrawal is the removal of the system from active operation. For example, users are deactivated, interfaces disabled. No data should be added from the system from this point and the future. So this is the end point for the entire system if you retire it. Decommissioning is the application of system is removed from the use in an organization once it has been retired and or has become obsolete completely. Disposal, this could be the documents, data, software or hardware which is permanently destroyed, so that this retirement plan knows as disposal. From this point, there are a lot of items that has to be managed by the IT department as well as the project group if they will be migrate the data or the system from one point to another. So it has to be careful while making a decision on disposal of a system. Data migration may be required when an existing system is replaced by a new system or an upgraded, when an operational system experiences a significant change, or when the scope of use of a system changed. The migration process should be accurate, complete, and verified with the documentation along with all GAMP5 procedures. So once you retire your system, if you are not putting a new system on top of it, you don't have to worry about data migration, because this means that technically you are disposing your system rather than the data migration. But if you are moving the entire structure to a new platform, there are quite critical decisions has to be made. That's why IT as well as production has to be involved directly, and quality management system should support with the documentation so that the old system may stay in a server for a long time, so that if you need to go back to the first system, at least to check the data or having an issue with the cold testing of your system, you have to verify your requirements for the data migration. That's all about the GAMP5 environment for the second edition. As I said from the beginning, ISPE GAMP5 on-demand training can be found on this QR code, as well as if you want to buy this ISPE GAMP5 Second Edition document, you have to visit ispe.org, and on their library, there are many documents available, guidelines and baselines, along with this GAMP5 Second Edition. Thank you very much for your time. I'll be answering a couple of questions. Now, let me check the questions part. Okay. One question is about, is there any other supporting documents rather than GAMP5 in order to achieve this? So if you remember the structure that I showed, the prism that I showed you during presentation, there are guidelines and baselines that are supplied by ISPE, and this could be a good starting point in order to ensure for a specific definition. Otherwise, like GMP Annex 1 as a regulation includes most of the required parts. There's a PHSS monographs as well as PDA documents that could be support all your activities. When this guide will be effective, it is effective immediately. Like I said, this is not the guideline that you have to follow. In fact, this is for your service. If you find it useful, for me, for all pharmaceutical companies, it's quite useful and handy. So nobody will be asking you whether you are following GAMP5 procedures on your computerized systems, but it is important and essential for you to follow up these guidelines so that you will be self-declare yourself as a GAMP5 compliant company. Otherwise, not like in ISO standards or GMP requirements, where we have no deadline that will become effective soon or come effective in a certain period of time. Once it's published, it's also available on ISPE website. Can we apply this GAMP5 to the other industries rather than pharmaceuticals? ISPE prepares all the documents specifically for the pharmaceutical environment, but most of the documents, as you can anticipate, can be applied for other clean rooms, especially the structure given as a life cycle approach can be applicable for any other industries. So if you are from different industries, from different clean rooms, you can easily implement them into your structure, into your network, so that the different industries can also benefit from this GAMP5 document. I'm checking for the other questions. Okay. What about the previous version of GAMP5? It also replaced. I mean, the second edition will be available here. Still, GAMP5, the first edition, most of the parts are up to date compared to the newer version. But if you check the website, ispe.org, you will be seeing what's new in this new document and which parts are, as I described here in my presentation, which parts are updated, which parts are newly added to the system. So it replaces the first version of GAMP5, so you don't have to worry about the changes from one to another. So you can simply follow the second edition. That's all for today. If there are other questions, I'll be answering them through the mail. But as you can see, I have my mail here too. Feel free to send your questions in. So I'll be happy to answer. Thank you for your time today and hope to see you on our next webinars. Thank you.